Good morning, everyone. Let's try this again. Class has started? Yes? Everybody's paying attention? Yes? Good. All right. Really?
I don't know who this is.
Okay. All right, we'll figure it out. All right, but I can imagine all your enthusiasm and excitement for this morning has to do with the topic that we're going to discuss today. Okay, so we're finishing up on the theme of metaphor. And so what I decided to do by giving you this Lakoff and Turner reading was have a look at what metaphor can actually do to a person's understanding of what it is that you're discussing. All right, so the issues that I raised in the list of questions were to get you to think about how metaphor or other euphemisms or other figurative language can actually change the understanding of the topic that's being discussed, particularly when they're controversial topics, right? So things like euthanasia or abortion. Now so the language surrounding these topics, of course, can be quite different depending on the belief system of the person discovering it. All right, so the same thing goes in terms of people reporting on these topics as well, right? So the things that you read in the news about it. Did people find interesting cases of news stories looking at language, different language used in different news stories? Oh, I'm not liking these faces you're making to each other, like, oh, I forgot to do that kind of face. That's not a good sign. All right, so with all that in mind, what I'm going to do is put you into new groups, and we will go through the questions relating to, questions relating to the topics raised by Lakoff and Turner, and a few questions to think about in terms of life, death, and time. Okay, so, all right, so please have a look at the handout for Lakoff and Turner. You see you have these 10 questions there to think about that you prepared your notes for. Yes, okay. All right, and what I'd like you to do is just we don't have any pre-reading questions to discuss this time. So please go ahead and, actually, it's kind of broken down into these sections on purpose. So go ahead and talk about the first 3 for now, all right? And then we'll take a break and we'll talk about those all together. All right, let me just stop you there, all right, so we can get into some of these sort of basic ideas about what Lakoff and Turner were discussing. And just a quick reminder, please don't forget to make sure that you do know the names of everyone in your group. Next week, week 4, I'll be asking you about your plans in terms of your group, the groups for the presentation. So whose group are you going to be in? What topic are you going to be presenting on? All right, so please make sure that you're thinking about that, right? That's coming up very soon. Okay, but in the meantime, let's, also, don't forget to make sure that all of the quiet people in your group are participating, right, equally. Everybody should be participating equally. Okay, let's have a look at these first few questions here. Question? Yeah, okay. All right, so let's have a look at these first 3 questions all together. First one, well, they're not questions, they're metaphors. People are plants. Not a new idea, I don't think, for people. No? Lakoff and Turner didn't introduce this to you? Okay, Yuki, what do you think about that one? Can you explain people are plants?
People are plants in the way that plants have life cycles.
Okay.
When plants of art were born, when flowers mature and then when it dies, they die in the same way.
Okay, all right. So a plant is a living thing like a person is a living thing, and there's some kind of life cycle that a plant goes through that's similar to what a person goes through. Mm-hmm. Okay. Any sort of further description you can give of that, Wakana? No details at all? Just plant life cycle is the same as a human life cycle?
Yeah.
No other connections that can be made? Physical, maybe?
Physical? Like
Okay.
If that's like us in our most beautiful stage.
Okay. I got the feeling that Wakana was saying, like now.
And like when the leaves are like all crispy and like falling, that's like us.
Like, when is that you? Or us, I should say. When is that us?
Right before we die, when our faces are all crispy.
Okay, yeah. I mean, the poetry that we can create from what Wakana is describing here is just immeasurable. We have, but this is good. This is the right idea. Okay, so there's this idea of a kind of full bloom, right, at your sort of peak, right. This is the most, right, that you can sort of achieve physically in your life. But we've got all the steps before that too that we could discuss, right? How does it all start out?
The sprouts.
Okay, all right. So yeah, so you sort of first sprout from a seed. We make connections there too to human life, don't we? Right? Seeds. Yeah, people getting it? All right. So like a plant seed and a human seed, right? So from this seed grows life. Okay, so sprouts life. All right. We're kind of getting it. Yeah, there's this sort of fertilization period, right? There's the, before the sprout actually breaks the surface of the soil. Feeling the poetry yet? Okay, and then what happens to the sprout, Wakana?
What?
What happens to the sprout next?
It sprouts.
Mm-hmm.
It just comes out.
It gets bigger. Okay, all right. All right, so this isn't an earth science course, so you're safe. That's all right. But yeah, think about when you've got the stem, and then you have buds, right? And the buds on this, right? And then they blossom, right? They flower, they open up, right? And then suddenly you have full bloom, right? So you have these kinds of, Now, of course, it is difficult to go into too much detail on this kind of thing because, of course, a plant doesn't just do that once. Well, most plants don't do that just once, right? Like a human life cycle does. But yeah, it's certainly the connections that Wakana was describing later on in life, right? So the kind of drying up, the withering, so the becoming less youthful, right? All sort of connects and relates. Sure. Anybody have other ideas about that great life cycle that we can draw to plants? Some of these words, we use them in human life, right? So things like seed, right? Planting the seed, right? It's this kind of euphemism for making a baby, right? We have, really sprout, sprouting. Sometimes we relate that to really small children who are growing quickly. Blossoming, right? I think especially for girls, right? When they're sort of growing up, maybe 12 years old, 13 years old, and people say, "Oh, she's blossoming into such a fine lady." Right? What a lovely young lady, really blossoming, right? I don't know how I feel about that, but it is definitely something that gets used. Do these sound familiar to you? These kinds of connections? Yeah? Okay. All right. Good. How about number 2? Death is a final destination. Saya.
Well, that's the journey, so it's like the last step of that journey is death.
Okay, so if life is a journey, if we understand life to be a journey, then death is the end of that journey. Okay. All right, so can you give any sort of details about how we would say life is a journey?
It keeps going on.
Okay. All right. Yeah, there's this concept of kind of going, that there's this sort of moving through life, so it's sort of going forward, not backward, right? So we have these kinds of descriptions of the way that life gets lived as this sort of movement toward something, right? Some sort of final destination. Other ideas about the details related to life as a journey? Is that okay for now? Let you discuss that a bit more? All right. Because we do get into it a little bit later, don't we? Is it in here? Oh, we don't. Okay, well, we'll talk about it a bit more when we get to number 10, all right, in terms of this lifetime. Okay, so number 3, time is a thief. Hiroyoshi.
So it's like a metaphor used to describe how our possessions get stolen away by time.
Okay.
So then those possessions include beauty, strength, youth, and many other aspects.
Okay, so there are things that we believe that belong to us, like beauty, youth,
Strength.
strength, and similar aspects. Okay, beauty, youth, and strength. So we feel like those are things that we have, and the only thing that takes that away from us, well, not the only thing that takes away from us, but the big thing that takes it away from us is time. Therefore, time is a thief. Good explanation. Other people have that same idea? Yeah? Does anybody have any details you can use to describe that? Bless you. So, hey, any, yeah?
Nothing
Yeah? No detail in particular?
No.
Okay, I mean, there are other idioms, other metaphors that we can connect to this. If it's a thief, then there's this idea that somehow what we had was something of value, right, that was taken away from us. And this is when we can make other connections to other metaphors and other idioms, things like time is money, right? So if this is what we have, this is how we have it, this is how we spend it, right? Spending time, spending money. Then you think about those possessions that you have where time is the thief that takes it away from you. Other things may be too, right? Accidents and things like that. All right, but yeah, time is taking those things away from us from a certain point, right? I mean, for a while, time seems like such a great giver, doesn't it? Right? Time is increasing beauty and increasing these things. But youth, right? I mean, yeah, I suppose there's a little bit of increase toward a place. I'm going to just give you this idea, in case it doesn't come up when we get to number 10. But just thinking about, have you ever heard about the idea that life is lived backwards? Have you heard this before? Life is lived backwards, right? Really, what we should be is born as elderly people, right, with all of the wisdom of the life that we have before us, and then have it slowly sort of drift away from us until we become, right, little babies held, right, and then we disappear into people's imagination, never having existed. Have you heard that before? Yeah, a few people, yes. Yeah, this movie Benjamin Button that came out a few years ago, right? It's kind of based on that concept, right? This idea that if only we could live our lives backwards, right? So if we could only have it that way. That story is a little bit different because he didn't actually have all the wisdom of an old person when he was born. But if only we could do it that way, right? Wouldn't it be great? Have all that wealth while we have the energy to use it, right? That kind of thing. As opposed to as you get older, you make more money, and then what are you doing with it? You're giving it to your grandchildren. Yeah? Interesting idea? Okay, I just thought I'd get that in your head so that you could think about it as we go through the rest of this. But what I would like to get into now, if nobody has any comments on that, okay, are the topics that are raised here that are related to life, death, and time. So we have these, ideas here about passed away, mercy killing, terminate, pro-choice, pro-life, right? See what you think about 4 through 7. Go ahead and tackle questions 4 to 7, and we'll talk about those all together.
But they use terminate for euthanasia, abortions, but not euthanasia, right?
Yeah, because they want to make the fetus or the embryo appear like it's not alive. So they use the word terminate. In euthanasia, there's life involved, and they acknowledge that.
Like birth, abortion is like for infants, right? Like for babies. It starts at that early stage, right? So like, it says that like
Abortions for babies?
Is it for babies?
Well, I mean, it depends on how you define baby.
Maybe so like the egg. Like, can you abort a baby from that egg?
Is it a baby?
Yeah, like that's what it said. Like defining a person, it depends on how you define a person. Like if you define that egg as a person, then it's, I don't think terminate is a good word, but like, are you on it? Because it has its own DNA already and stuff. But like if you just consider that as an egg, a thing, terminate would be okay. Like and the thing is okay. But like euthanasia, it's like you're all fully mature, so it's life is too complicated to end it. Like, an egg is okay, but that's what I think.
Go ahead and discuss that.
Because people doesn't acknowledge as a life. We don't know how they feel or anything. Like their thoughts and their ideals. I think the family knows, oh, these people, this guy doesn't want to paint. Maybe, no one knows.
How much of it we don't even know if person is good for that person.
Yeah.
How's it going?
We stuck at this question because I found the article
Good,
where
all right.
they used the termination and terminate for both abortion and euthanasia.
Oh, okay.
So I couldn't get the answer for this question because I couldn't figure out why.
How did they use terminate for both?
Terminate a pregnancy, termination of a very sick person's life.
Yeah, okay.
So I didn't differentiate.
No, you're right. That's very interesting. What does everybody think of that example, right? He's so terminating a pregnancy and then termination of a very sick person's life. How right? Look at how those words are used and think about what's being terminated. Is a person being terminated in those cases?
It's not even there as well.
Like what's being terminated in this example?
Termination of
What's the object of that verb?
So, like, how can people say that
life.
Life, okay. And then what about?
and for you to say,
This life too.
Think about that. Circle those words and talk about what you think the value is of those words. Why would the BBC be okay using the same verb for those two different things? And are they different?
go to the positive stage and just go down to that.
Are we sure we're okay with this?
57 page 47 of that.
Think of the possibilities, right? We all have our own ideas about what we think these things mean based on whatever reasons, right? But what we want to try to figure out is why people would use terms the way they do. So why would the BBC choose to use terminate for these situations? How did they use them? Do you think they got away with it? Do you feel like it was an accurate use of the word? That kind of thing. All right? Okay. Because that's good. I'm glad you found that example because that actually highlights what I was hoping we would talk about. Yeah.
It's like you can say terminate, putting it to an end because a fetus is, some people can argue, but fetus is not a conscious, didn't start the conscious journey of life. So you would be able to use that for abortion, but not for euthanasia. Somebody who has a life
This is the difficult conversation, but yes, this is good. This is the right idea. Just trying to get an idea of how everybody sort of, gets an understanding of why words are used that way. Don't worry so much about, giving your own personal ideas about it. Do you find good examples in the news?
Well, I found an article talking about defining a person.
Oh, good. Okay.
So that's where I got the egg idea.
Good. Yeah.
And the pro-choice part, there was the BBC. It talked about giving. It had arguments about women for abortion, how about giving the right their body, you know what I mean?
Right.
That's where I found those articles.
Okay. Yeah, defining a life is a huge issue on the abortion debate, right? All right. Well, let's talk about these all together. There's a lot to discuss on these topics. Sorry, I can never find a good time when everybody stopped talking at the same time. So sorry to interrupt. But let's talk about these all together. These topics really come down to the words, right? So on this theme of metaphor, what we're really looking at are the values of these words, right? How can these words carry, or in what ways do these words carry more meaning Why do words get used the way they get used, and in what contexts, right? Who's using them? What does it mean for people to use certain words over other words, right? All right, so let's start out easy. Number 4. Why is death sometimes said as passed away? Saku.
So it's that his passed away means it is a metaphor of a person's departure to another world. So it is not death, but then he still lives and departure to another world.
Good. Yeah, I think it's I like that you use the word departure, because that's this idea that somebody is leaving a place to go somewhere else, right? So there's this departure, right? Like when an airplane departs, right? It's going, you've finished in this place, but you're off to somewhere else new, right? How many people saw the movie Okuribito? Yeah, gets translated as departures, right? There's something about this concept that when people die, it's not just the end, it's on to something else. Yeah, so this idea that they passed away helps people to feel less of an ending, I guess, right? Because it's certainly not something. It's not a concept for the dead, right? It's a concept for the living, right? So we have this idea that we say, oh, this person has passed away, has passed on. Passed on, yeah, as well. Do people say, oh, that person died? Can you say that? I mean, you can, right? And, people do. But what are the situations where that happens? They're different, usually. When would people say, oh, yeah, that person died? Sorry?
When we talk about someone not related to us.
Okay. All right, so when the concern for us isn't so much that this person has passed on to something nice, right? When the concern for us isn't about what, the value of that particular life, right? Then the concern isn't for what then happens, right? So for us, it's just a physical human person, right, was in this world, and that person is no longer in this world, so we can say the person is dead. Do people sometimes say it about people they knew, people they loved? When would people do that? And I don't mean that they just didn't like them anymore, and so they don't like to think they hated that person that is dead, finally dead. Although, maybe. Isn't there some kind of cultural understanding of what it means to pass away or pass on? Would there be people who don't believe that people pass on to something else after death? That they just die? Do some people believe that? Do most people believe that? Not most? Okay, all right. Yeah, I mean, we have this sort of, maybe, in terms of common sense, right? We have this sort of shared human trait, right? There's this sort of idea that the life that we live is too valuable, right? That we all think too hard in this lifetime, that it could all just possibly just end right at the end, and then that's it, right? So there's this somehow kind of shared idea, shared understanding that, whatever happens after that, we'll never know, right? Because nobody can do that. But we like to dream about what's after death, right? We like to think that it does this or it does that, and you get to do this other thing, and the afterlife, right? We have all these concepts. Where do those ideas come from? I mean, is that a collective unconscious idea? Is that just a shared human trait? Are we all born with that idea? Hiromi?
I think because death is something really, in a way, close to us because all of us face it. It's not something, it's kind of something that we learn, and it's something, because we experience, it's a very sad thing. We try to make it soft and make it easier on feelings, so I don't think it's something, it's like we kind of learn something from it.
Good. All right, that's a very good explanation. Our understanding of death comes from our life's experiences with death, right? So it all depends. People have this idea about, when a child loses a pet, right? Oh, it's so sad, but it's such an important lesson for that child to learn. And what a better way for the child to learn than to lose a human relative, right? So if we can do it with a pet, right, then this is such a good thing. What a kind of important life lesson, right, for a child to learn. We have these learned things, right? So this idea of making it softer for people makes sense, right? That would be something that we would want to be able to do for each other. That makes sense, right? Simply being nice to each other, right, allows us to use euphemisms like passed away, passed on. Yeah? Other ideas about that? Does that work for people? So nobody raised the issue of religion. How much do you think religion plays a part in this idea of passing away, passing on? Barbara? Yeah?
Is it related to Christianism that we think after we die we go to the world of God?
What does it look like? Huh? What does that world look like? No? None at all? Like if somebody said typically, what does that look like? Where is that place? Heaven. All right. What does heaven look like, typically?
All good.
Okay. Any particular color that kind of stands out? White. Okay, good. We're getting there. We're getting there. More? Come on.
And then each one of us have a part of a mansion to live in.
Okay. I like Barbara's heaven. This is nice.
That's what they say. They say it's in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
In God's mansion, everybody has it a place meant for each one of us. Okay. So yeah, there's something very comforting, right? There's something very So this idea of white and bright, right? Who are what else do we kind of imagine up there in heaven? Angels, right? This is very Christian, right? But yeah, angels with big wings, right? And the angels come down from heaven, right? We've got all these concepts that we sort of relate to this. What happens after you die? Oh, you get to go to heaven and you bounce around on clouds, and everybody's wearing white robes, and everybody's got wings, and and we've all seen movies that sort of show this concept, right? And we all go, yeah, that sounds great. What does that do for people if that's the image that you have, right? If you've got a mansion waiting for you on a cloud after you die, how does that make you feel about death? You stop thinking that death is a bad
thing. Okay. Yeah, death isn't such a bad thing anymore. And this is a lot of the reason why we have so many concepts that are so sort of illustrative in organized religions about what happens after death, because it gives people hope, right? So that means that whatever you do with this life, it is actually important because there's more after this. Yeah? Does that work for people? It's a general concept. Now, this afterlife idea, of course, exists in most world religions, right? There's this, reincarnation, right? We've got all these sort of concepts of there being more after this life that we live now. But yeah, religion is certainly a way that sort of gives us actual descriptions of this place, right? Like it's been reported that this is what it's like. But what about if you're really bad in this world? Where do you go? Hell. What does hell look like? Fire, right? Yeah, dogs barking, pools of fire, and there's like a big man down there. Yeah, what does he look like? Scary. Yeah, he's got like horns. Yeah, what color is he? Yeah, he's like red and black, right? Yeah, so we sort of make all these associations. And we can all do it, right? I mean, if it's movies or cartoons or whatever it was that gave us these ideas, we have them, right, wherever they came from. But, again, all those things are cultural as well, right? I mean, as the Americanization of the world continues, more and more of these concepts do become global. But, culturally there are these ideas about what the afterlife looks like, as a kind of concept altogether. All right, good. Anybody want to add anything else to that? Okay, number 5. Why is euthanasia sometimes called mercy killing? Now, mercy killing is just one of the many terms that are associated with euthanasia. We have a lot. Taiki, what do you think about that one? Mercy killing.
I said how a life is a journey, and then
all right.
How mercy killing allows a person to go to afterlife earlier.
Okay.
And that would be a mercy for the person because he would be able to start again, or in a sense.
Okay, why would the person want to start again? What's wrong with this life?
Well, if the life sucks, Well, that's kind of idea.
Yeah.
Mercy.
Okay, all right. So yeah. So a person who wants euthanasia wants to die, and that death would be understood as merciful, yeah, as bringing mercy to that person, because somehow that person is suffering in some way. Life is just sucking, yeah. It's just kind of the general feeling, yeah. So how is euthanasia different from suicide? It's an important distinction that we need to make. Katsu?
I think suicide is just killing yourself, and euthanasia is like you're killed by someone else.
All right. So this is a really important distinction that we have to remember. Even though we look at euthanasia as suicidal, right? Ultimately, the only way we can use the word suicide is for a person who actually kills himself or herself, right? That's suicide. So we have this term euthanasia that is a mercy killing for some people who use that expression, and you can find that in news reports. What other expressions do you find that are related to having someone else kill you?
Murder.
All right, yeah. People definitely use murder, right? People who, the doctors who perform euthanasia have been called murderers, right? Are they called murderers by everyone? Who doesn't call them murderers? Okay, yeah, the patients themselves definitely don't see the doctors as murderers. They see them as, saviors, right? Angels, right? Like, oh, this is so, I've been saved, right? I don't have to continue living this horrible life, right? I've got a way out, right? I get to end this journey here thanks to this wonderful doctor. What other expressions? I heard you use a good one. Yeah?
Death with dignity.
Death with dignity, good. All right, when does that get used?
Well, when patients become vegetables, or their brain die.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got the case of people who, of course, physically can live on because their body functions are still going, and with the help of machinery or family members, right, we can sort of keep these people going. But it raises the question of why? Why do it? Right? Why continue the life of a person who's brain dead, right, or is in a coma, right, and is never going to come back? Why continue that? And so we have options. It depends on where in the world people live, but there's the legal option of having that life ended, right? Which people would then maybe use the term like death with dignity, right? So rather than a person just kind of being brain dead for as long as that physical body lasts with that dead brain in it, not a very dignified way to go, right? So if it can just be ended now, let's get this over with, it's much more dignified. Okay, right? As a concept. Now remember, not at any point you don't have to agree with any of these things. Just to understand that these are how the terms are used, right, conceptually. Other expressions, other ideas?
Death squads.
Yeah, good. Death squads, right? There's a really famous euthanasia doctor in Michigan called Dr. Kevorkian. People call him Dr. Death, right? He was sort of the leader of the death squad. Death squad, yeah. So like a team of killers. People use death squads for like hitmen. Right, that's for organized military, right, sort of execution groups, right. We've got all these sort of expressions that we use and get carried over into different, in different situations. But in terms of euthanasia, it's so interesting to see them applied on this particular issue because it carries so much meaning. Who would use a term like death squad?
Those who oppose euthanasia.
Okay, yeah. What are their thoughts about euthanasia? They just see it as murder. Okay, all right. And even brain dead people and everything else, it's murder, right? A life has to end on its own. It can't be ended by another person. That's murder, plain and simple. Right? So these defining terms, things really do depend on how black and white people see things, right? If it can be very crystal clear that this is the way I see this. It makes it easy. I can define it this way. I don't get confused in discussions. There you go, right? But it also sort of limits the ability to discuss the topic from different perspectives, right? So the idea of death with dignity would be lost on a person who describes a doctor who performs euthanasia as a murderer. I keep saying a doctor who performs suicide. Do people know what the expression is, the sort of politically correct term is for these doctors?
Assisted suicide.
Yeah. So the suicide itself is a physician-assisted suicide. Yeah, sorry. So I didn't ask the question properly, but yes, that was the answer I was looking for. So physician-assisted suicide is another expression for euthanasia, right? So your life is ended by a doctor, right, who is able to do it, right, has the right facilities, the right knowledge to be able to do this safely. Yeah, all that's working. Otherwise, yeah, a murderer, killer, serial killer. I think Dr. Kevorkian was called that by many people. Which part? Physician-assisted suicide. Right? So it's interesting, right? Because that's where we do actually use the word suicide because you wanted it for yourself, but it is physician-assisted, right? So the concept is that this person did kill themselves, but this person was unable to kill themselves without the assistance of a physician. So, physician-assisted. Yeah, good. Kaho, anything to add? No? Okay. You're good. All right. Now, number 6, why is terminate used with abortions but not euthanasia? I had to sort of keep myself from using the word terminate in the discussion on number 5. What do you think about this one, Aito?
Well, for abortion, the mother, without the baby's intention, kills it, well, terminates it. And, well, in euthanasia, it's something different because the patient asks the doctor to be killed. And
most of the time.
Yeah, most of the time. So, like, the difference in whose intention it is and the word terminates is used differently.
Okay. All right. So the idea that it's related to who says that this is going to happen, right? So in the cases of abortion, that never happens, right? And in most cases of euthanasia, it is the person whose life is ended themselves who... Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. No, it is interesting though. Aito sort of corrected himself, right? He said, "Oh, it's the mother's decision to kill." Terminate. Right? It does change, right? It changes the discussion altogether depending on what word you use. Right. So if you look at abortion as terminating a pregnancy, or you look at abortion as killing a baby, then you have two very different situations. Right? Much like with euthanasia, right? You've got murder and you've got physician-assisted suicide, right? So we've got these kind of very different ways of looking at it. All right, now, Barbara, I'm going to go back to you just because you had that example from BBC. So I'm curious about what your group had to say about that. If you can explain first what you found.
I found that BBC used termination and terminate for both euthanasia and abortion. They said euthanasia is the termination of a very sick person's life in order to relieve them of their suffering.
Okay, so termination of a very sick person's life. All right, and
for abortion, they had 2 ways. The abortion debate deals with the rights and wrongs of the deliberately ending a pregnancy before normal childbirth.
Okay.
Killing the fetus in the process.
Okay, all right. So.
And then also, another way, the abortion debate asks whether it can be morally right to terminate a pregnancy before normal childbirth.
Okay, all right. So in this case, the word terminate is used with pregnancy. Yeah, so terminate the pregnancy. And interestingly, in the extended definition, they also say killing the fetus. Yeah, so the word killing is also in there.
Ending with killing, and then they just said terminate in the other way.
Okay. But all in the same paragraph?
No.
Oh, no, okay.
Different pages.
Oh, okay. All right. So, but the one article had both terminating a sick person's life?
One sentence,
Yeah.
It was the abortion debate asks whether it can be morally right to terminate a
pregnancy before normal childbirth. That's one. And the other one is ending a pregnancy before normal childbirth, killing the fetus in the process.
Okay, all right. All from BBC.
All from BBC.
Okay. All right, yeah, good. I mean, this is the thing that you have to check, and this is the reason why I wanted you to check news sources, because I wanted to see what different news sources had to say, right? So which news sources use what kind of terminology. Big news organizations like BBC have to be careful not to alienate particular people, right? They don't want to lose, right, customers, basically, right? They can't lose audience members. CNN does the same thing. But you will find other news sources that appeal to particular belief systems, right? So you will find, for example, Christian Science Monitor, right? You won't find words like terminate used in the same way as you find words like kill, right? Wakana, can I go to you with your example that you found? What news source was yours?
Mine was the New York Times.
New York Times, okay. And what did they say?
It just explained how to define a person.
Okay.
Like whether to define the egg as a human being with all its DNA and stuff, or to just define it as an egg, an object. And if it's an object, it's okay to say terminate, to put an end to a thing. But if you consider that as a life, I think life is too complicated to say, to just put an end. So like terminate wouldn't be a proper word to use.
Okay. So yeah, this and it's interesting, right? This is a recent article, yeah?
I forgot.
Okay. But a lot of this has sort of come up this year in American news, particularly with the presidential election coming up and the political platforms that include issues related to legalization of abortion. 2011, okay. All right, so these ideas are conceptual, right, in terms of people's moral codes, right, the way that people live their lives, the way they understand the world. So to define a person at a particular stage of the growth of life is important, right? Do we go from the seed? Do we go from the sprout? Right? Where does it all start? And depending on where you start it, then to end that life would be killing, right? But if you can do it before then it's not a person yet, right? It's a seed or a sprout, or right? We can use our plant metaphor, and we can say that it wasn't there yet, right? It wasn't a life yet, right? And therefore it is not killing, right? But interesting, right? Fetus, right, is a term that people use to describe, before it becomes the shaped, right, the formed body that then is born and we have a baby, right? So this idea of a fetus being killed is interesting, right, from BBC, that they would use that expression, killing a fetus, right? So that would be something worth looking into as well on this particular discussion. So we see what I mean about all these differences and how they apply to people's belief systems. Does that all make sense? Because when it comes down to it, it's all words, right? These words shape people's way of conceptualizing these ideas. And so if we're going to define life at a particular stage and say that ending that life equals killing, then that's what we've got. Right? Otherwise, we can also say ending a life can also be considered terminating a life. Right? Barbara found in BBC that they said terminating a sick person's life is euthanasia. Notice it didn't say terminating a sick person. Right? But it's terminating a sick person's life. Right? So the idea that somehow life is like some kind of project, yeah, and then that project has sort of come to a close, and so we're going to terminate the project. It's okay to use terminate the project, right? Terminate the project, terminate the computer program, terminate the mission, right? We use all these sort of expressions about things that include something like a journey, similar to a life's journey, right? And we say, when it's sort of had its time, it's done, we've got as much as we can out of it, we terminate it. It's done. Otherwise, we're Arnold Schwarzenegger, right, with a giant gun. Actually, robot, yeah, the Terminator. That'd be kind of really the only time we talk about terminating people in that particular way. But yeah, otherwise, these expressions sort of control everything that we can say about it. So it does get difficult. And I was happy that Aito stopped and said kill, wait, terminate. What word do I want to use? Because it is, right, it does actually change the listener, right, in this particular case, the readers, if you're writing this stuff down, what they understand about it, right? So you have to kind of be careful how you describe it. All right, number 7, how can pro-choice be a euphemism but not pro-life? Now, this is a kind of challenge question, right? So how can this be possible? How would pro-choice be euphemism but not pro-life? So first of all, let's just clarify pro-choice, pro-life. What is the difference, Ray?
Pro-choice is for abortion.
For abortion, okay.
Pro-life is against abortion.
Is against abortion, okay. So for the people who are for abortion, in favor of legal abortion, why would they use this term pro-choice, and why would that be considered a euphemism?
Pro-choice is basically choice between conducting an abortion or not. And
okay.
By doing so, the mother may be relieved from like difficulties she might have having a baby. So I think pro-choice is more focused not on the fetus but the mother herself.
Good. All right. And so pro-life then? Why wouldn't we say that's a euphemism? How could that be possible?
So pro-life is like focusing on life. Life is basically death and birth.
Okay.
So I thought it's too direct.
Okay.
And in contrast, choice is more abstract. It's
okay.
direct. We can have a different interpretation.
Good. Good. You covered it. Yeah, I mean this is everything actually. Ray's really got it all here. So pro-choice has to do with the mother, right? Pro-life has to do with the birth. Yeah. The abstractness of pro-choice, meaning open to multiple interpretations and possibilities, is on purpose, right? As opposed to pro-life, which is directly targeting the most important issue for the people who are against the legalization of abortion, and that is human life, right? So therefore, no matter what, right, a pregnancy needs to come to term, and there will be a baby that comes out of it, even if it means the death of the mother, right? Even if it's involving situations where this would not be a favorable birth, okay? Whether it's health or moral issues, rape, incest, right? We have these kinds of cases. The number one issue in pro-life is life, and that's it, right? And if you look at it that way, you can see there is no euphemism there. Whereas the other one, in its abstract concept of choice, is meant to be open, right? It's meant to place no legal limitations on what a pregnant woman can do. All right, anybody want to add anything to that? Okay, so go ahead and discuss 8, 9, and 10. I've talked a little too much, so I'm not going to give you too much time. We're going to get together because after that we're going to talk about Abercrombie for a bit. All right, so just maybe 5 minutes for these next 3 questions. Any more to say about number 10? So just in terms of what you all think together, right? Because the passage sort of describes it, but what do you think of how that would work, in your own understanding of? Like, where are you now in your lives, All right, sorry to interrupt you. Let's try to see if we can do this all together and see where we end up. All right, number 8, why are euphemisms sometimes considered unhealthy? Masako?
Because people sometimes misunderstood the word euphemism.
They understand the word euphemism?
The original meaning.
Okay. Explain more.
Depending on different cultural backgrounds.
Okay. Okay, so not the word euphemism and the value of a euphemism, yeah? Okay, all right. So, any examples? So you don't have any in your notes?
No.
Okay, that's all right, no problem. Does anybody have any examples of how a euphemism can be unhealthy? Kaho?
Euphemism indirectly talks about something. And what it does is that it covers up the bad parts with the good parts.
Okay.
It hides the bad parts.
Okay.
Like what politicians do.
Okay. Okay. Masako, does that match up with what you were saying? That work? Yeah. So some kind of like covering up. Yeah. There's a difference, right? Sometimes people say that things are hard, right? So they'll say the euphemisms are soft, right? So we use words like passed away as a softer way to deal with a otherwise hard truth of death. Yeah. So there's this kind of painting over something, right? So not really taking a direct, not dealing with it directly, right? It's sort of moving around it in some way. So how would that be unhealthy? What's unhealthy about that? Doesn't that kind of seem like a good thing? Yeah, what's it? Oh, yeah, hiding the truth. All right. So it would be unhealthy in terms of what it could mean for people's understanding about that, right? So in terms of something like passed away, probably people would agree that it's kind of a nice idea, right? So that's a good euphemism, right? We would look at that and we would say it makes people's understanding about what happens at death easier to deal with, yeah? But there can be plenty of other euphemisms that people would not describe as potentially good for a person to understand that concept that way. One of the kind of possible physical things that people often bring up is there are lots of euphemisms for overweight, right? So people would say that somebody is very overweight, but you can't say to a person, you're overweight or you're very overweight. So you say things like, you are full-figured. Yes, Rubenesque, right? I mean, we have these other expressions that people use, and the interesting thing about that is people can say, I like being full-figured, right? So I like this thing, all right? That could not necessarily be such a healthy way to understand what it is that's going on with the person's body, necessarily, right? As the person who does not have that body shape, it's probably good, right? But for the person who has the body shape, maybe it isn't, right? Maybe there's something wrong with that. Maybe that person could actually physically be healthier if that person didn't have such a positive way of looking at how big he is or how big she is, right? So maybe, all right? Now that's a very kind of literal way of looking at this particular point, but it is interesting to think about how sometimes painting over the issues, sort of moving around the issues, isn't necessarily always the best thing for a particular person. All right, any other examples for that one? Anybody want to raise? Yes, Barbara.
Do you know that guy that says the fluffy guy? Bruno or something?
Well, yeah, what is that?
Like he's a comedian?
Yeah.
He said, I'm not fat, I'm fluffy.
I'm not fat, I'm fluffy, yeah. Fluffy is such a nice word, isn't it? Right? We think of fluffy, we think of kittens, right? Bunnies, right? That sounds so nice. Yeah, it's so fat, right? Truth is, right? Yeah, good. All right, now, moving on to number 9, and we're going to try to deal with this one quickly. In the Bible, time starts with God. There's this idea, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, blah, 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 right? It's the beginning of Genesis in the Bible. How is that possible? What do you think about that one, Rie?
Because God is the creator, so he also created the time.
Okay, all right. So if you go with the understanding with what the Bible says that God created the heavens and the earth, right? God is the creator. Then if that's the understanding, then therefore God created absolutely everything. So how was God before time, though? Right? Doesn't time kind of cover everything? Doesn't time go back infinitely? What was here before God? God was always. What was it? Nobody. No, it's just empty. Nothing. Okay. Yeah, I mean, this is the concept, right? This is the way that it's sort of described. So a Christian understanding of God would be that this is how we understand the world that we live in now. God has created all of it. End of story. We have no more concerns about how time goes back infinitely, and we don't ask the question of what was before God because God was always, right? And it's very simple. But how is that actually possible? This is where it starts to cause some problems, right? Because you think, well, time as a concept is a man-made concept, right? So we could say God created time. Okay, well, God, created man, so we put all this together into one big thing. But when we think about what that actually means for how the universe came to be, we run into some issues, right? So this is that sort of, we've got theories like the Big Bang theory, right? So there was an explosion of neurons way back when, and then the universe was sort of created out of that. But what was before that? Right? How did something come to be from nothing? That means there was always something? How far back is always? Right? So we sort of raise these larger questions about how this stuff could come to be. But the idea of the Bible giving some kind of response or solution to it eases people's stress and pressure about trying to figure all of that out. Right? It's sort of a simple answer. God made it. If you believe that, then everything's okay. Does that work for people with that question? Yeah? All right. Now, what about number 10 then? What does a lifetime as a day, a lifetime as a year mean? Now, that was raised by Lakoff and Turner, and so they give some description in there about these concepts, but what does that mean for you? So, for example, all of you, if you go with this idea that a lifetime is a day, what time is it? Right? I mean, literally we go to noon, yeah? So you're halfway through the day?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you've got another 20 years to go? And then you're dead?
No.
I mean, it's a kind of interesting thought, right? I mean, why don't we go with a year first, right? Then we'll go back to the day. How does it work with a year? Lifetime is a year. How do we do that? And we could probably go back to number 1 with the plant, right?
Break up in seasons?
Seasons, okay. All right, so what's the first season of life? Spring, right? That's the birth of everything, right? And then what's summer? Okay, so that's reaching maturity, yeah? In summer, all right, so reaching your peak full bloom, right, of the pretty flower, all right? What happens in autumn?
You start to fall.
The wrinkles set in, you start to look like this. Okay, there's this idea that, the things are dying, right? So those trees with all their nice leaves and everything else in full bloom, right? The flowers, they all sort of wither, right? And then toward the end of autumn, the leaves are falling off, right? And then what you have in winter is death, the end, right? So, the snow comes in, kills everything, right? All right, so we can see that one sort of, and it certainly gets used in poetry across cultures, throughout time. But what about this idea that life is a day? Metaphorically, according to Lakoff and Turner, when does life start? Morning. All right, so like sunrise, yeah? So when the sun rises, that's the beginning of life, and then it moves throughout the day. So what happens at sunset?
Die.
Yeah, all right, so it's really just the time of the sun in the sky, according to Lakoff and Turner. What about this idea that life is a 24-hour day? Right, now that was the question I threw out to you before, and people kind of went, what time is it? Right, this is actually a really interesting concept, and it's one that's used by child psychiatrists for suicidal teens. And they use the 24-hour clock to get the suicidal teenager to consider, what time is it in your life? If life is a 24-hour clock, what time is it right now? Right? And often, right, a suicidal teenager will say, like, it's like 9 p.m. So there's sort of, okay, right, like, no, let's really look at this, right? If you put your whole life on a 24-hour clock, all right, so how does that work? Where are you? What time is it? So what do you think about that in your lives? What time is it now if life is a 24-hour clock? What time is it? That sounds good, doesn't it? If it's 4 in the morning, you're 4 hours into your life. How much more life do you have ahead of you?
20.
Yeah, 20 hours to go. Yeah, you still got 5 times what you've just done.
Oh.
What?
Right? And if you say this to a suicidal teenager, right, and you say, look, do you realize for you, it's like 2 a.m.? Like, people have been asleep and they haven't even woken up yet. You haven't even started to live your life, right? And you think about that. You think, it's 4 a.m. Well, here in Tokyo, the sun is up often. It depends on the time of year. But you know, that's really, things are just kind of getting started, right? We can only sort of just start to head into Lakoff and Turner's idea about the sun rising and life beginning if we look at the 24-hour clock. What do you think of that? Interesting concept? Something you can work with? Yeah, definitely have a look at that and see what you think of it. Because it does sort of paint a sort of new image for what it was that Lakoff and Turner were talking about with this idea of a lifetime as a day or a lifetime as a year. Good. All right. Any questions at all about any of this? All right. So what I need to do is collect your notes from you. And what I am going to give you now is a new handout for Abercrombie. All right. So what we need to do, thank you. All right, what we need to do is we need to start thinking a little bit more about how Abercrombie applies to everything. The Abercrombie is going to be the main text for the midterm. And in the end, I'm going to actually give you 4 chapters of Abercrombie to use for the midterm, all right? So the questions that are here are about chapters 3 and 4. So we're going to really just kind of start talking about, we're not going to do all of this in today's class, all right? We don't have enough time. But we'll get into it a little bit. And I guess while I'm on it, in terms of schedule, next class on Thursday is when we're going to start the theme of love and anxiety. Okay, so you do have your next paper due on Turnitin, right, Wednesday sunrise. Okay, so Tuesday night. So please have a look at that. It's actually another reading from Plato, but it's Plato's Symposium. So it's actually Aristophanes' speech. All right, so looking at this character Aristophanes, this person Aristophanes, and what Aristophanes had to say about love and anxiety. So please have a look at that. Freud is the other reading for next week. So if you want to read ahead, and you can get some really helpful ideas from Freud when you're writing your essay on Aristophanes' speech from the Symposium. Okay, so love and anxiety is coming up next. Yes, essay due on Turnitin, Tuesday night, Wednesday sunrise. Yeah. All right. And the other thing that's happening in the next class is some people are coming to visit. Some Japanese high school guidance counselors are coming to see. We're the guinea pig class. We're on camera. We have the guidance counselors coming to check us out. So yeah, so they're going to come and hang out in the back of the room and see how life goes. So just so you know, please everybody be here on time. Yes, Hiroshi, in the room on time. Thank you. Okay. All right. So that's Thursday. All right. So in the meantime, though, what I want you to do is make sure that you're keeping up with how Abercrombie applies to all of this stuff. All right, so that's why I wanted to make sure we spent a little bit of time on this again today. So have a look at this handout. The information that's up at the top is pretty much what we covered before, all right, just about schemata. So go ahead and move into the pre-reading questions, and then we'll talk about those. And then with whatever time is remaining, you can discuss the chapter questions, but we won't talk about them in class, all right? So, but just for now, the pre-reading questions, we'll talk about those all together, and then you can have a look at the other questions, all right? So just 3 minutes, all right, for the pre-reading questions.
Which one? Is it like eyeball see or perception see?
Well, it kind of goes together, right? It's like what you actually see, you interpret differently. So like a green light, blue light kind of thing.
Y'all gets that.
All right. Okay, sorry, let me stop you there just so we can make sure that we're all clear about these first 2 questions, because these are important, right? This will kind of help us to get the right perspective on at least a clear perspective. I shouldn't say the right one, because there is no right or wrong, of course, right? Just a clear perspective on what Abercrombie is getting at. All right, so A, why don't we all agree about what we see? How is it possible that we can see things differently from each other? Momoko?
Because we all see things differently.
Why do we see things differently?
Because our personal experiences are different, and the way we see things come from, like, they're based on our personal experiences, so they can be different.
Okay, all right. So does everybody agree then that our personal experiences are what allow us to see things the way we see them? Yeah, they define the way we see things? Okay, so if people have different experiences in any different way, which we can agree everybody does, means that we're not going to always see things the same way as another person. But do you think that most of the time you do see things the same way as the people around you? Does that seem unreasonable? Why do you see things, most of the time, why do you think you do see things the way the person next to you sees it? Sorry?
Well, just like a while ago we talked about metaphors.
Mm-hmm.
It's about having a common understanding about something, so we can have similar perspectives about certain things.
Okay. All right. So if we're going to share, if we can understand a metaphor in the same way, then we can see something in the same way, right? So it can be extended to that kind of understanding. Does that work for everybody? Yeah. So most of the time, yeah. When wouldn't that happen? When would you suddenly be in a place where you don't see things the same as everybody else?
When you're in a group that share different beliefs, like another culture group.
All right. Okay, so if you transplant yourself to a completely different culture, so for example, you fly to India, yeah, and you put yourself into a space where you're surrounded by people who have had completely different cultural experience, cultural background to you, then maybe you will see things differently from all the people around you. Outside of that situation, more than likely you're going to share things in common with the people around you. Okay, good. Why do we often fail then, if we can agree on that, why do we often fail to predict a person's behavior? I mean, if we share those things in common with the people around us, we should be able to predict their behavior, shouldn't we? Shouldn't we kind of know what a person is going to do? Zaya, what do you think about that one?
It's impossible to predict one's behavior because you can't just see and know what he or she thinks of them.
Okay. All right, so as much as we might have things in common with other people, in the end, it's impossible to truly know what's going on inside that person's mind. Yeah? Does that work for everybody? Okay, but I mean, in general, we have expectations about behaviors, right? So we certainly don't expect people, you know, as a teacher in a classroom, you know, I sort of had an expectation of how students are going to behave in the classroom, right? So if I ask a question to the class, I hope that somebody will raise a hand. If I don't see a hand, I call a name, right? So that's just kind of a system that works, right? And there is a systematicity to all of this, right? At the same time, I don't know what's going on inside all of your heads, right? I can sort of hope that there are cogs spinning and things are working, but I don't always know. You know, I kind of get an idea if I see a yawn or something like that. I sort of, oh, okay, maybe I know a little bit of what's going on inside that mind, but outside of that, I don't always know, right? I can't necessarily predict. So that kind of work to get you to think about that sort of dilemma, right? So we have all these things that we share in common, and yet at the same time, there's no way we can really know what's going on in somebody else's mind. All right, good. I've left you with all of a minute and a half to look at the other questions, but please go ahead and look at those other questions, discuss them in your groups, and then that will be it. And I look forward to reading your essays, yeah, Wednesday morning. Don't forget to do the peer mark. Okay.
Like we're doing right now. Yeah.
So is it the
discussion, debate?
I think so
like
too.
You listen to like people's opinions, and then you'd be like, oh,
yeah.
Right? It's about
now you have to decide whether or not you think that that's like an inevitable outcome of being a person, or if that's something you can consciously control.
You can.
Yeah. And how much do you, right? It's hard to decide, isn't it? All right, thank you very much, everyone. See you Thursday.